All right, so this is kind of a dense informational meeting, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's virtual information session. My name is Tori Visner, and I'm DPR's Alliance Grants Program Lead. And today we are going to be talking all about budgets and budget justifications. So this meeting is our 9th in a series of virtual information meetings, and these meetings are intended to help you prepare your proposal application. So please note that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to DPR's website. And just as a really quick aside, we've held other sessions on things like crafting a scope of work and building a strong alliance team, and a couple others that are available on our website for viewing. I do want to preface this meeting by noting that DPR has two grants programs. We have our Alliance Grants Program and we have our Research Grants Program. Our Research Grants Program is currently closed, but we are accepting applications for our Alliance Grants Program through December 8th, 2022. However, the information that's covered in this budget meeting really is relevant to both of our programs. At any point, if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or drop questions in the chat. Additionally, there should be time for questions at the end of the session. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with covering the purpose of the budget and the budget justification. So when reviewers rank proposal applications that are received, the scope of work and budget is weighted at 20%. The solicitations for each program detail the specific criteria that reviewers will use when ranking proposal applications. But with regards to budgets, reviewers will be considering if the budget is reasonable to complete the project, whether the budget justification appropriately justifies project expenses, and whether the budget is complete and accurate. So before we really delve in, I'd like to cover a few definitions for three different types of costs. Understanding these costs is really essential to being able to accurately determine your budget. And we're going to be referring back to these terms throughout the presentation. So if these terms are a little confusing right now, don't worry, we will be discussing them in much greater detail as we continue. So the first type of cost I'd like to discuss is going to be your direct costs. So these direct costs are costs which can be identified specifically with a particular grant project and which can be directly assigned to grant activities. So these are going to be things like your lab consumable costs, so things like media, things like that, postdoc or researcher salaries, and then any kind of travel costs. The second type of cost is going to be your modified total direct cost, or MTDC. This is going to include all of the salaries and wages, fringe benefits, materials, supplies, services, travel, consultants, and subawards up to the first $25,000 of each subaward. And in particular, it excludes things like graduate student tuition and things like equipment. And then finally, we have indirect costs. So the indirect costs is going to be a percentage of the MTDC that covers costs of conducting business that cannot be identified readily and specifically with specific grant projects or with a specific grant activity. So indirects typically cover things like university building maintenance, support services, library operations, administrative services, things like that. And it's typically just a flat percentage. The budget justification or the budget and budget justification template is going to be contained within the proposal application form for each program. So here on the right, you'll see an image from our Alliance Grants proposal application. We do require that all applications submit their budgets via this format. And we do understand that applicants or their budget offices may have internal software that is used to develop budget calculations, and it's absolutely allowable to use this internal software, but the values do at the end of the day need to be transferred to the provided application form. So they cannot be provided to us on any internal forms or Excel spreadsheets, anything like that. And then finally, please note that DPR staff does go through and manually verify the values when performing application screenings. So we do ask that you ensure that all of your calculations work out correctly. All right, so the first table you're going to see in the budget section of the proposal application form is going to be the task budget table. And the task budget table is intended to be an estimate of what fraction of the total direct costs will be allocated to each individual task. And the purpose of this task budget is to help the reviewers understand the value of each task. And so each task in the scope of work should be entered into the task column. So that's that second column that you see in the table on the right. And then the amount of personnel, travel, materials and supplies, subcontractor costs, et cetera, that are specifically devoted to each task should be totaled up and then entered into the cost column. So that's going to be that third column that you see on the right. The total costs of the individual tasks should add up to the project total direct cost of the entire grant. And the project total direct costs must also match the total in the main budget table. And I'm going to be showing examples throughout to help clarify this point. So here's an example of the task budget table, and I just want to take a quick moment and note that this example and then all the examples I'm going to be including and discussing in this presentation were developed by DPR staff. They are entirely fictional examples. They are simply intended to provide our applicants with a comprehensive example of how to complete the budget. It's in no way intended to describe DPR's preferred grant topics, budget sizes. It's not intended to limit applicant creativity at all. And then these examples are pulled from documents that are available on our website. They're called guidance documents. We have a specific one for our Alliance Grants program, and then we have a specific one for our Research Grants program. In addition to having a full-length scope of work, budget, and budget justification, there's also a lot of additional useful information in there, including some recommendations on completing your application and some frequently asked questions. And again, these were really created to assist our applicants with answering common questions, particularly as they pertain to filling out the application in areas like the scope of work and the budget. So I highly recommend reviewing those resources. And I would also encourage you to take a look at both examples, particularly with regards to the budget, just because there are very minimal differences when it comes to filling out a budget for an Alliance grant versus a research grant. And so here in this example, you see that the applicant has filled out all of the tasks that are included in their scope of work, and they've assigned a cost in that third column. And then finally at the bottom where it says project total direct costs, they've summed together the costs from each of the tasks. And then I noted 2 slides back that the project total direct costs in the task budget, so that's that highlighted number that you see on the image on the left, does need to match the total direct cost in the main budget table. And the main budget table is shown on the right, and we will be going through in a lot more detail all the different components in the main budget table. I just want to show that up front. All right, so this is an overview of our main budget table. So the main budget table is intended to be an overview of the costs allocated to each budget category for each year of the project. So the amount of personnel, travel, materials and supplies, et cetera, for each year do need to be entered into the appropriate categories. And we do ask that you enter costs to the nearest whole dollar. So rounding up if it's over 50 cents or rounding down as appropriate. The total costs per year and the total cost for the overall project period do need to add up correctly. And again, DPR staff does go through and manually verify these values. So we ask that you also go through as you're completing these and just ensure that the calculations all work out. And then all of these values that are going to be filled out in this main budget table will need to be fully justified in the budget justification. And again, we're going to get to more examples of all of this. So don't worry if it's a little unclear at this point. All right, so starting at the top of the main budget table, you're going to want to fill out the name of the principal investigator and their organization. And then along the top of this table, we see year 1, year 2, year 3. Please note that year 3 is only 6 months in length. So it's from July 1st of 2025 through December 31st of 2025. We ask that you do not change these project dates as this is a template, but we do ask that you plan costs appropriately based on the start date. So for Alliance grant projects begin September 1st of 2023. So that makes year 1 only 10 months. And the reason why we also have that July 1st, 2023 is because our research grant programs do begin July 1st, 2023. All right, so the first budget category I'm going to discuss is going to be the personnel budget category. And so to receive grant funds as personnel, staff do need to be paid through the same organization as the principal investigator. So again, that organization that's listed at the very top under the principal investigator. If personnel or if staff that are going to be working on a project are not paid through the same organization, they need to be listed as a subcontractor. And that's a specific budget category we'll get to in just a little bit. We ask that you combine the salaries and fringe benefits for all the individuals that are being paid through the principal investigators organization on the personnel line. And then again, ensure that the salaries and fringe benefits are calculated in year one using the correct start date. So again, for our Alliance grant applicants, that's going to be September 1st, 2023. And then again, just note that year 3 is going to be 3 months in length. So when you're calculating salaries and fringe benefits, ensure that you're calculating it based on that time period. Our second budget category is going to be travel. And I do want to note that only travel within the state of California is allowed using grant funds. So it's totally allowable to have individuals that are out of the state, for example, working on a project. There's no issues with that, but we unfortunately cannot pay for their travel. So if they were to, say, fly to California, that would not be an allowable cost to charge. However, once they were inside the state, any travel from there would be allowable. So I know that's kind of a point of question that a lot of our applicants have. So I just want to highlight that as only travel within the state is allowable. Any travel that's funded by the grant does need to be included in this budget table. And then we ask that you combine travel for all individuals that are being paid through the principal investigators organization on the travel line. So again, if you have subcontractors who will be traveling and that travel is within the state of California, that's allowable, but it would be included in that subcontractor line. Just a few other quick notes regarding travel. Travel and reimbursement for travel costs needs to be in accordance with appropriate policies. So here I have 3 different bullet points, and depending on the type of applicant you are, you can go to these different travel policies and reference them. So there's a separate one for non-UC and California State University applicants. The second bullet point is going to be for if you're a University of California applicant, and then the third one is going to be for our California State University applicants. If you are a federal or tribal agency applicant, please reach out with any specific travel policies or questions prior to submitting your proposal application so we can ensure that we're able to answer any of your questions. All right, our third budget category is going to be materials and supplies. So materials and supplies are going to be anything like lab consumables, tools, compost, software subscriptions, anything like that. You're going to want to combine all of those costs on the materials and supplies line. The addition of a material, if it's not included in the approved budget, may require a grant amendment. So a grant amendment is once you have a fully executed grant agreement, it's basically going and making edits, and it does require the application to go out for signature again by both the organization that the PI is affiliated with and then DPR. So it's not the most trivial process. So we do request that you think about any materials that you may need and ensure that they're included in the budget. Our fourth budget category is going to be equipment. And equipment has kind of a unique definition that's included in full in our terms and conditions. And if you have any questions on whether or not something qualifies as equipment, definitely feel free to reach out. But equipment is defined as having a useful life of at least 1 year, having an acquisition unit cost of at least $5,000, and having been purchased with grant funds. Equipment is also defined as any products, objects, machinery, apparatus, implements, or tools purchased, used, or constructed within the grant, including those products, objects, machineries, apparatus, implements, or tools from which over 30% of the equipment is composed of materials purchased for the grant. So again, the full definition for equipment can be found in the terms and conditions that are available on our website, but we also do encourage you to reach out if you have any specific questions about whether or not something qualifies as equipment or not. From there, you'll want to combine all equipment costs on the equipment line. All right, our fifth budget category is going to be rent. So you're going to combine all rental costs on the rent line. And so that's going to be anything like facility rentals, greenhouse rentals, field rentals, item rentals, anything like that are going to go on the rent line. Then we have our subcontractor. So our subcontractor is an independent entity that will be collaborating with or providing a service to the applicant to complete objectives of the grant. So do recall that if a staff cannot receive funds through the principal investigator's organization, they must instead be listed as a subcontractor. So you're going to want to combine all of the subcontractor's costs into the subcontractor line, and that's going to be including any indirect costs. And then all subcontractors will need a completed budget table. So it'll basically be a copy of this main budget table and then a copy of the budget justification to thoroughly break down the costs that are associated with a given subcontractor. If a project includes multiple subcontractors, each subcontractor should have their own line in this budget table. And then again, they should have their own complete budget table and budget justification. Subrecipients are going to be a specific class of subcontractor that applies to UC and Cal State University applicants only. If you are one of those applicants, you should refer to your institution for guidance on whether or not a subcontractor does meet the criteria of a subrecipient or not. Similar to subcontractors, if you have a subrecipient, they should have their own budget line of all of their costs, including the indirect costs, and then they should have their own budget table and budget justification. All right, then we have our other direct costs, or ODCs. So we request that you provide a cost breakdown for any other expenses on the ODC line. So anything that doesn't fit into one of the above budget categories. This is commonly things like insurance, graduate student tuition, IT costs, things like that often go in other direct costs. For each other direct cost, we request that you specify whether or not it is subject to indirect costs. So things like graduate student tuition, it's not allowable to charge IDC on that, whereas other things like IT costs, it would be allowable. And if you have any questions on whether or not an ODC, a specific ODC, is subject to indirects or not, you can feel free to reach out to us. There's also a more in-depth explanation of the modified total direct costs and what indirects can be charged on in our terms and conditions. If for some reason you have more than 5 other direct costs, you can feel free to add more line items as necessary. Then in this highlighted total direct costs line, you're going to want to add up the costs of all of the budget categories for each of the given years and enter the values on this line. And then do recall that the value inputted in the last column, so that's the total one, that indicates total direct costs over the full project period, so over all 3 years, needs to match the project total direct costs in the task budget. So that was that first table that we discussed. So just as a reminder, this is what that task budget looks like on the left, and then the main budget table on the right. So just make sure that those 2 highlighted numbers are matching exactly. All right, let's talk a little more about modified total direct costs now. So the modified total direct cost is calculated for each year by totaling all of the direct costs that are allowed to have associated indirect costs charged on them. So this includes all salaries and wages. It includes fringe benefits, materials, supplies, travel, and subcontracts up to the first $25,000 of each subcontract. So costs associated with equipment, capital expenditures, patient care charges, tuition remission, rental costs of offsite facilities, scholarships and fellowships, and then any portion of a subcontract in excess of $25,000, and any subrecipient costs cannot be included in the MTDC calculation. So we ask that you enter the MTDC on a yearly basis and then on a total basis in that highlighted line on the right. From there, you're going to enter the indirect costs rate. Sometimes it's called indirect costs, sometimes it's called F&A, depending on your organization. F&A stands for facilities and administrative. This is the cost rate as a percentage that's used by your organization. And do note that DPR allows a maximum rate of 25% to be charged. So from here, you'll calculate the indirect costs, again, on a yearly basis and on a total basis by multiplying the MTDC by the indirect cost rate. And again, just as a reminder, the maximum rate is 25%. Finally, to finish up this main budget table, you're going to calculate the total costs per year by summing the total direct costs and the indirect costs for a given year. Do make sure that you're using the total direct costs rather than the modified total direct costs at this step. And then calculate the total costs per proposed project period. So that's that final line item by summing the total direct costs and indirect costs over the entire project period. So here's an example from one of our sample scope of work. Again, these can be found on our website in the guidance documents. And so just again, as some quick reminders, just overview type things, do ensure that the total cost per year and the total cost for proposed project period add up correctly. Again, we at DPR, we do go through and manually verify these. So you're going to want to ensure that all these costs add up correctly. Please ensure that your costs are entered to the nearest whole dollar, so rounding up or rounding down as appropriate. So we don't want to see any cents or anything like that. And then ensure the costs in this main budget table match with the budget justification. So that's what we're going to discuss next. And then again, just as a reminder, the example scope of work and budget documents can be found on the proposal application website for each grants program respectively. So again, as I mentioned, our research grants program is currently closed right now. We are still accepting applications for our Alliance grants program, but it may be helpful for you to go through and look at both of the examples, particularly as it pertains to the budget, because there is a lot of overlap and really just minor differences between the two programs when it comes to filling out these budgets. All right, so this is what our budget justification template looks like. And the purpose of the budget justification is really to fully justify the amounts that are included in the main budget table and to show transparency in the proposed use of public funds. The applied costs should be entered into the tables in the appropriate category. So there's going to be categories that match with what's in the main budget table. For example, here, this is the very beginning of the budget justification. You can see that the first category is going to be personnel. They're in the same order as in the main budget table. And then all costs should add up correctly. If a category is not relevant to your specific project, feel free to just delete the tables and any text contained within and just simply put NA or not applicable, something like that, just to clean it up and shorten your application, help to simplify it. And then all values that are in the main budget table do need to be fully justified here in the budget justification. So starting at the beginning, this is going to be the personnel section. So you're going to want to go through and starting with the principal investigator, you're going to list all known personnel who are going to be participating in the project. That's going to be any collaborating investigators, individuals in training, technical and support staff, undergraduate students, anything like that. And for this purpose, we understand that you may have identified the need for a specific personnel. So if someone like, say, a postdoc or a graduate student, but have not hired that person yet, it's totally appropriate to just put TBD, to be determined, just so we know that you're aware that someone will be hired for that role and you can include their salary and estimated fringe benefits. We then ask that you specify the role of each of the staff members on the project, and that includes any TBD positions. So here's an example. On the right here, we see that a number of staff names are listed. We have Dr. Ann, we have Aaron, Tim, and then below that for role on the project, we've listed, Ann is the principal investigator. She's going to oversee all aspects of the project. Aaron's going to be the program manager. And then also note that for each of them, we do ask that you list a percent level of effort. So for example, Anne, her percent level of effort is 3% per year, Erin 25%. And then this is just a secondary example. One was pulled from our Alliance grants example, one was pulled from our research grants example. If you want to go through and read them in full, I highly recommend checking out these resources from our website. All right, and then within the budget justification, we have tables that are really going to help you figure out the breakdown for all the different components. So for example, here we have a salary table. And so for each staff member, you're going to go ahead and fill in the staff name and then include information like base salary for each of the years, any included increases, that can be an annual increase or a merit increase. We're going to ask that you include the percent level of effort, and then based on all of those, the total salary requested. Again, we do request that you just be mindful of the time periods for the Alliance Grants Program. Alliance Grants Programs should budget 10 months in year one, so that aligns with a start date of September 1st, 2023, and then budget for 6 months in year three, so for an end date of December 31st, 2025. Again, so ensure all salaries and fringe benefits are calculated using the correct start date. Again, for the Alliance grants, that's going to be September 1st, 2023. And then here on the right, we see two examples. There's a research example and an Alliance grant example. I'm going to focus more on the Alliance examples because that is our program that is currently still accepting applications. So we see for Erin in year one, we've included a base salary of $75,000. It's calculated for 10 months, so 75,000 with a 25% effort. We see the total salary requested in that bottom line there. And then similarly, the similar calculations have been done for year two and year three. And then again, just noting that year three should be based on 6 months in length. Our next table that we have will be the fringe benefits table. So for the fringe benefits table, after you've gone through and done the salary tables for all the different staff that you have, you'll fill out this fringe benefits table for all of the staff as well. It's going to include the fringe benefit rate that you're going to fill out in year one, year two, and year three, and then multiplying the total salary requested in any of those given years by the fringe rate will give you that fringe benefits rate. So again, here we just see two examples. Again, one is from our research, one's from Alliance, but there's really minimal differences between the two, except for when it comes to the start date in year one. So again, you're going to calculate those fringe benefits by multiplying the fringe rate by the total salary requested for each given year, and then include that value in that bottom line where it says total fringe benefits requested. Then finally, in the personnel section, there's going to be kind of a wrap-up summary table where it's going to ask you to total up all of the personnel costs for all of the years. So there's going to be a line for yearly salary totals. So you're going to add up the totals for all of the different personnel. Similarly, do the same for fringe benefits, and then adding those two lines together will give you the yearly personnel totals for year one, year two, year three, and then for the total. And so here we see two examples, one from research, one from Alliance. Again, just please ensure that the yearly salary totals and fringe benefit totals do add up correctly to give you that final line item. And then this bottom line item is what should match what's in your main budget table. And so here in this top image, we see the calculated summary total personnel costs, again, for year one, year two, year three, and then total. So this is what should match in the main budget table under that personnel line item. All right, the second portion of our budget justification is going to be the travel section. So we've created these travel tables for you to fill out for each trip that will be occurring. We ask that you note whether or not the trip occurs in year one, year two, or year three. We ask for a destination, duration, staff names, and then the purpose of the trip. So this is what the full table looks like. It asks for a breakdown of costs based on travel, per diem, and lodging. So for travel, go ahead and check the box next to flight, rental vehicle, personal vehicle, depending on what type of travel it is, and then fill out the relevant information. And then in that column on the right, you'll go ahead and calculate the total based on, the travel expenses, or based on per diem, based on per lodging. And then you'll want to sum up all of those totals to give a total cost per trip. If your trip is going to be repeated, for example, if you're doing some sort of sampling, field sampling, something like that, or doing an annual conference or something like that, there may be a case in which the trip occurs 2, 3, multiple times. Go ahead and write the number of trip occurrences there and then multiply it by the total cost per trip to get that grand total. So here's an example of a travel trip. So this trip is occurring in year 3, and a staff named Pete is going to be going to the Central Valley for 5 days to do some sample and data collection. And he's going to be taking a personal or company vehicle, traveling 330 miles. It lists a mileage reimbursement rate, and multiplying those two together gets that number in the right column, that 193. It's a 5-day trip with 1 staff at a per diem of $62. So again, multiplying that out gets the 310 number. And then similarly, multiplying the number of nights by the number of staff and the cost per day gets that lodging total. Adding all 3 of those different components together gets the total cost per trip. And then because this trip is occurring twice, we take that $895, multiply it by 2 to get the grand total of the trip. So depending on how many different trips are included in your project, you're going to want to fill out one of those tables for each of them. And then again, there's kind of the summary table at the end of the travel section, where you'll be able to sum up the yearly travel totals for year 1, year 2, year 3, and then again for the total. And again, just ensure that these values that are in the summary travel table match with what's in the main budget table. All right, then we have a table specific for materials and supplies. So you're going to want to itemize each material and supply as a separate line item. And then at the bottom of this table, you're going to want to include a complete justification of the project's need for these items. So here's just an example. For example, they're requesting iPad tablets that cost $600 each. They would like to request 4 of them, and they'll be purchasing those in year 1. So the total comes to $2,400. Similarly, you can see they've done a similar thing for the remaining items like field guides, safety glasses, gloves, food and beverages. So go through and just make sure you've filled it out for each item that you're requesting. And then ensure a complete justification of the project's need for the items is included below that table. So for example, they're requesting 4 tablets in year 1 to allow trainees to access software necessary to identify and document plant observations in the field. So it doesn't need to go, into too much depth. It doesn't need to be, pages and pages of justification, but just ensure that there's enough to fully explain and fully justify the project's need for the specific items. Again, we have a kind of summary table for this as well, for total materials and supplies costs. Again, you're going to sum together everything that's included in that table for each of the years and on a total basis. And then again, just make sure that the values that are entered there match with what's in the materials and supplies budget category in the main budget table. Then we have a table specific for equipment. And again, for a full definition of what qualifies as equipment, I highly recommend checking out our terms and conditions or reaching out specifically to inquire as to whether or not a piece of equipment or whether or not something you're looking to purchase, an item, qualifies as equipment, or whether it would be better suited as materials and supplies. So definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions regarding that. But equipment is typically anything greater than or equal to $5,000 with a useful life of more than 1 year. And so we request that you enter the item name in a separate line item for each of those. We ask that you justify the need for the equipment, and then again, list out the equipment purchase cost in year 1, year 2, or year 3 as relevant. And with any of these tables, with anything like materials and supplies with equipment, if you need additional line items, just feel free to add them as needed. So here we have an example. They are requesting the purchase of an automated DNA purifier for high throughput DNA extraction of field and greenhouse samples in the amount of $68,500, and they're requesting it in year 1. So they've entered it in this year 1 column. Similar to all the other categories, we have this summary table where you will sum up the total equipment costs on a yearly basis and then on a total basis. Again, this value, the values that are entered here should match with the equipment budget category that's in the main budget table. Next, there is a rent table. And so very similar to the equipment table, you're going to want to list the facility or the item that's being rented. We request that you include a justification. If there's any annual increase that's applicable, I know this is the case a lot of times with things like greenhouse rentals, things like that. And then you're going to want to list the projected costs for each of the years. So for year 1, year 2, and year 3. So for example, we have, here's an example table where they are requesting greenhouse rentals to conduct grapevine Pierce's disease assays. So again, the justification doesn't need to be anything too over the top, just enough to let reviewers know why this item is being requested. There's no applicable annual increase in this case, and they're requesting $2,500 for 2 separate greenhouses in year 1. Again, there is a summary table for the total rental costs. So you sum up all of the rental cost totals for year 1, year 2, year 3, and then the total. And you're going to want to make sure it matches with what's in the main budget table for the rent budget category. All right, then let's talk a little bit about subcontractors and subrecipients. So subcontractors are going to be independent entities that are going to be collaborating with or providing a service to the applicant to complete the objectives of the grant. And then subrecipients are a specific classification of subcontractors. Subrecipients apply only to our University of California and California State University applicants. And again, if you have any questions, we highly recommend reaching out to your offices and inquiring as to whether or not a specific subcontractor meets the qualifications to be categorized as a subrecipient. All subcontractors and subrecipients are going to need a completed budget table and budget justification. And so here, this is still part of the main budget justification. So there will be a section for subcontractor costs. So depending on how many subcontractors you have, you can, add or delete as necessary. And you're going to want to sum up all of the costs associated with the subcontractor. So any personnel costs, travel costs, materials and supplies, anything that can be included, including your indirect costs that will be charged on them, you'll want to include in the subcontractor costs table that's shown at the top of the image on the right. And then again, you're going to want to sum it up for year 1, year 2, year 3, and then the total. And again, if you have multiple subcontractors, make sure to break them each out on their own line. And then very similarly, subawardee is just another name for subrecipients. So any subrecipients, if you're a University of California or California State University applicant, you'll include them on this second table that you see on the image on the right. And then similarly, if you have multiple, make sure to break them up across separate lines and then add up the costs for each of the 3 years and then for the total. And so here we have an example of total subcontractor costs. So for this example that you see on the right in the top, they have 2 separate subcontractors. and they've broken out those costs across each of the 3 years and then summed them all up together to get the total cost. And then again, make sure that the information that's included here in this subcontractor cost table matches what's in the main budget table. So again, they should be broken up for each of the specific subcontractors. So if you have 2, make sure there's 2 lines. And then similarly, I've mentioned this a couple times, but the Alliance Grants projects have a start date of September 1st, 2023. And year 3 is 6 months in length. So year 1 is going to be 10 months in length. Year 2 is 12 months. Year 3 is 6 months. So just make sure to take that into account. Make sure any subcontractors that you have account for this when filling out things like personnel costs, when calculating fringe benefits, things like that. And then similarly, here we have the subrecipient example. So in this case, they have 1 subrecipient, and they've broken it out by year 1, year 2, year 3, and then created the total. And then again, make sure those totals match with what is in the main budget table. All right, so I mentioned this a couple times. All subcontractors and subrecipients need a complete budget table and budget justification. So you're going to want to take this subcontractor subawardee budget, and it's identical basically to the main budget table we've discussed, except for, it specifies subcontractor or subawardee. And you're going to want to fill that out in full. So again, breaking out all costs over the various budget categories, including personnel, travel, materials, and supplies, all of those costs that we've discussed. And then you're going to want to fill out in full the budget justification to, again, fully justify any of the costs that are included in that subcontractor budget. So again, similarly, if something doesn't apply, for example, if there's no travel or no equipment, you can feel free to just delete those components of the budget justification and just put not applicable. So for example, on this example that we have here, they have 3 total subcontractors and subrecipients. So they have subcontractor 1, subcontractor 2, and then subrecipient 1. So they're going to need to fill out 3 of these budget table and budget justifications, so 1 for each of those, in addition to completing the main budget table and main budget justification. Then we have our other direct costs, so our ODC section. Very similar to the table we saw for equipment and rent, you're going to want to list out the other direct cost, specify the category, again, include a justification of the need for it, and then break out the costs across year 1, year 2, year 3. So an example that we can see here, other direct cost 1, they are requesting tuition and fees, and that's to contribute to a compensation package for a graduate student that would be working on this project. So they've broken out the cost for year 1, year 2, year 3 for what these tuitions and fees are going to cost. And then again, there's a summary table for you to sum together all of the other direct costs that are being requested as part of your project. And then again, these values that are included in that summary table should match with what's in the main budget table. Again, if category is not relevant to your project, you can feel free to delete the tables and put NA. It usually helps with just simplifying, streamlining your application, and just making it easier to review. All right, then let's talk a little bit about indirect costs. So this is going to be the indirect cost portion of the budget justification. You're going to just calculate out based on what your organization uses as their indirect cost rate. And again, do recall that DPR caps this at 25%. So you're going to take your modified total direct costs and you're going to multiply it by that percentage to get your total indirect costs. So for example, we see on the right here, they have done just that and calculated out their total indirect costs. And again, just make sure it matches with what ends up in the main budget table. Recall that the indirect cost rate, sometimes it can be called F&A for facilities and administration. It's the same thing, should be entered as a percentage used by your organization. And again, just as a reminder, DPR does allow a maximum rate of 25%. And then I just want to touch briefly on the subcontractor and subrecipients as they relate to charging indirects and their inclusion or exclusion from the modified total direct costs. So there is a $25,000 total maximum limit allowed for each subcontractor over the term of the grant that can be factored into the modified total direct cost. So again, the modified total direct cost is important because this is the amount on which indirect costs can be charged. And so here, for example, assume that we have a subcontractor that is going to cost $34,500 over the total length of the project. And the applicant is estimating that $15,000 of that will be in year 1, $12,000 will be in year 2, and $7,500 will be in year 3. So that's that kind of first row we're looking at in this table on the right. And so again, $25,000 can be factored into the MTDC over the entire term of the grant. And so in year 1, the total $15,000 can be factored into the main budget because we're under that $25,000 limit. In year 2, only $10,000 of that $12,000 requested can be factored into the main budget. And so then that leaves $2,000 that cannot be factored into the main budget because we've reached that $25,000 limit. And then in year 3, all of these $7,500 requested cannot be factored into the modified total direct costs. So again, this is only relevant when it comes to calculating modified total direct costs. It is completely allowable to request the total subcontractor total direct costs if they're in excess of 25,000. So, with this example, it's totally allowable for them to request that $34,500 in total direct costs. But just when it comes to calculating that modified total direct cost, does that $25,000 total maximum limit come into play? And so with that, I would like to thank you all for attending this presentation. I just want to take a quick moment to give a few reminders, and then I will open up the floor to any questions. First, I want to let you know about our final upcoming presentation. There's going to be a general question and answer session that's going to be held on December 1st from 10 to 11 a.m. So if you are thinking of applying and you have any questions as you're filling out your application, completing the scope of work, completing the budget, please do consider attending that. I would love to answer any questions you have. The other virtual information sessions that we've held, so this is our 9th of 10, so we have 8 other ones that are available on our website for viewing. So we have things like crafting a scope of work. We have ones on building a strong alliance team, among others. So I highly recommend going and checking those out. Second, I'd like to remind everyone that the Alliance Grants Program has $1.5 million in funding this year for projects with budgets between $50,000 and $1.5 million. Completed proposal applications need to be submitted by Thursday, December 8th, 2022 to the email address that is listed on this site. So that's dprpmgrants.solicitation@cdpr.ca.gov. And then finally, information on our grants program, including materials, recordings, resources. I mentioned a lot about the sample scope of work and budgets. So all the examples that I showed throughout this presentation were pulled directly from there. So I highly recommend going and checking out that guidance document, and they can be found on the website listed in that second bullet point there. And so with that, again, I'd like to thank you all for attending this presentation, and I would love to open up the floor and answer any questions you may have. And if you have questions, you can feel free to either just unmute yourself or you can drop your question in the chat box and I can go ahead and read it and answer it aloud.
Tori, I have a question. This is Shraddha from San Francisco,
Yeah.
Department of the Environment. In some cases, our subcontractors have proposed budgets as a fee for service. So for example, rather than breaking it out as an hourly rate, for example, if they conducted a pest prevention assessment for a particular site, they would say it's $2,500 for each pest prevention assessment that we do for you. In cases like that, what do you propose for the subcontractor justification? Like
Yeah.
when it's not like by our salary and fringe and all of that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I feel like that is something that we do see quite commonly. I would recommend in cases like that, listing that cost as an other direct cost. And then just within there, explaining kind of the breakdown, explaining that, they charge this amount based on, for, whatever they're completing, and then estimate, the number of those that would be completed to get to your total. Does that make sense? I can scroll back to where like the other total direct costs are, so you can see maybe an example of what that would look like. Yeah, so in cases like that, I would recommend just including it as an ODC, including a brief justification on, the cost, the total number requested, and then, the total amount per year. So for year 1, year 2, year 3. And so in cases like that, you wouldn't need to fill out information on personnel or salary because it's not calculated that way.
Hi, Tori.
Hi, yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Barbara. I'm from UC Riverside, and we might have people from UC A&R working with us, and we would put those people under the subcontractor category, right? Or sub-awardee category.
So for UC campuses, if you have a sub that's going to be another UC campus,
yes,
that goes under the sub-awardee or sub-recipient costs.
So even if they are part of the alliance, if one campus is UC Riverside and the other campus is UC San Diego, and then we might have UC Davis as well, or UC A&R, then they would go under, so the UCs would go under subcontractor, the other ones?
They would go under sub-recipient.
Sub-recipient,
Mhm.
okay. All right.
And that
the grad students would be like if UC San Diego wants to employ a grad student for it, so that would be then a sub-recipient, and the costs for tuition fees would be other direct costs separately.
Yeah, so any any graduate students that are hired would go under the sub-recipient budget specific for the campus they're being hired for. And then any salary that the grad student would be paid would go in personnel, and that would be subject to any, indirect costs. But then any tuition and fees specifically is what cannot have indirect costs charged on them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then Shraddha, I think you may have dropped off for a second, so I'm not sure if you heard in full my answer to your question.
I'm sorry. My internet is really bad right now, so it keeps cutting in and out.
Yeah, I would just say, in cases like those where there's not a breakdown that can be, specified to things like personnel, salary, things like that, I would recommend putting it as an other direct cost. And so within kind of this table, you would include the information, it's 2,500 for XYZ. You'd say, how many are requested in any given year, and kind of use this table to fully justify those costs. So you wouldn't include anything in, say, personnel, because, if that's not how they calculate the costs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's helpful.
One more question.
Yeah.
This presentation was very helpful, but the person doing the budget is not at the, well, we have a shared way of doing the budget. So there is an analyst, and then there is us. And I think, do you have this presentation online as well, so that our analyst could watch it as well?
So we record all of these sessions and have the slides available. It'll probably take a little bit of time for this specific presentation that I just gave to be uploaded, but we've given 2 other versions of
Yes.
budget one. And so if you go on our website, you can go ahead and download those. The slides will be available, as will the recording, for anyone to reference. We're also happy to take any questions. Our email can be found on this previous slide. If there's any specific budget questions, you can always definitely refer them to us, and we'd be happy to address anything in particular.
That's really nice of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And I see my colleague Jordan just dropped the link for where you can find the old recorded sessions in the chat. So hopefully you find that helpful.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I was battling to myself, muted again. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, I see we have a question in the chat. For the past 3 years of Alliance grants, what were the actual average total award amounts, % awarded to education, government, NGO, and for-profit organizations? So I do not have that information on the top of my head, but we do include on our website. If you go to our website, we have a list of all of our funded Alliance grants that you can see going back to the total length of our program, including the total award amounts and who the grants went to in terms of what organization. I will say in the past 2 years, for this previous year and then this current year, we've had enhanced levels of funding. And so previously, prior to last year's cycle, we traditionally had 400,000 available for funding. So if you look on that list of the funded projects that DPR has funded as part of our Alliance Grants program, you're going to see that the values add up to a lot less than is available. For example, this year we have, 1.5 million, which is significantly higher than that 400,000. But we have traditionally awarded grants to, different organizations. We don't kind of have any limits on who can apply as long as they meet the eligibility criteria. So if you're a government organization, a for-profit organization, we do welcome your applications. And again, my very helpful colleague Jordan has linked to those previously funded Alliance grant projects. So hopefully that's helpful to you.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
If we would like to collaborate with people from the DPR directly, could we suggest, would we budget salary components for these people as well? If we suggest to collaborate with somebody from DPR directly as part of the Alliance, or for a workshop or for a conference or something like that, like, do we budget that as travel?
So that is actually one of our eligibility criteria is DPR employees are not allowed to participate in Alliance grant projects, with the exception of the grant manager who will be assigned to your project should it get funded.
Yep.
So please do not include any DPR employees or anyone like that in your application or in your budget.
Okay, right. Thank you.
All right, so I know that was kind of a long presentation I gave. So if anyone has any last minute questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you have any questions that come up at a later point, we are always happy to answer questions via email. Or again, if you attend our next virtual information session, it'll be our final one on December 1st. And that's going to have kind of a brief presentation I'm going to give on just some frequently asked questions that we've received. And then we'll open up the floor to more questions. There will be a lot more time for any questions that you may have. All right, so I'm not seeing anyone else unmuting or dropping questions in the chat. So with that, again, I'd like to thank you once more for attending this virtual information session. The audio recording along with slides will be uploaded on our website. But if you don't want to wait for the specific one, we do have 2 previous budget ones that have been uploaded and the slides are available that you can reference. And the content was very, very similar between those. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the email listed. Additionally, we hope you will consider attending our remaining question and answer session. And so thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.